We're back after a very, very long hiatus. Hey, Greg, remember me?
Hey, Joe, we are so back. It's great to see you.
We're so back. For familiar listeners, you followed Greg and I on our mobility and blabbing journey for years now. But we're so excited to have teamed up with Zag to present what we're now calling Zag Talk. So, hey, Greg, new show?
New show, same time, same podcast, more Zag. That's what we got.
More Zag. But we're so excited to team up with them. As anyone that follows mobility knows, they have a great site tracking the ins and outs of this industry we all love. So we're excited to weave some of their content into the show. But as always, it's going to be breaking news, hot takes, me and Greg teasing each other, and you listening in because I'm not sure. Just you like the sound of our voices, I suppose. But how you been, Greg?
I've been good. I would say you forgot snarking on SPACs, so we'll have some of that today as well.
SPACs, yeah.
But yeah, no, I've been good. I went to my first Herbivore. I was excited to be. It was really strange.
How was it?
For me, you imagine it was surreal to be in downtown LA at a mobility conference and be at yours finally. But I had a great time, and yeah, paired with the inimitable Julia Thane as your MC. So for those listeners wondering why I was there, that would be the reason, because now we're back on the podcast. But yeah, I had a wonderful time because, again, like, Herbivore live action was the intersection of all my interests there, of basically of mobility, technology, real estate, policy, and seeing it all on stage literally was great. I think my favorite session was the folks with Wing and DoorDash and Coco, and yeah, like seeing how this is playing out and how those business models are going to shake out. I had a great chat with Stanley from DoorDash, who's running their labs division, and I think it was off the record, so I can't tell you what we talked about, but it was particularly where they're prototyping what comes next, and we can talk about that in a bit more.
Well, I think live events are best experienced after the fact and while listening to people that attended it. So listeners, you're in for a real treat. But no, the reason we bring up Herbivore is because today's guest, Zach Rash, CEO and co-founder of Coco Robotics, he was also on stage at Herbivore announcing a big partnership with DoorDash, as Greg alluded to. So we checked in with him right before that, actually, and kind of got, I think, a really fun startup story where how did he come up with this crazy idea? How did he scale it? How has he now gone international with big partners? So I'm excited to tune into that at the back half of the show. But yeah, I think without further ado, should we just start cruising through the news, Greg? What do you think?
Let's do it. I think we are new partners to be slightly more professional, but only ever so slightly. So what do we got first in the queue?
Why don't we just start with all things AV, right? Because that seems to be the word of the year is AV, robotaxi. And so our friends at Uber have really been on a roll lately. Their technique seems to be to partner with anyone and everyone with an autonomous vehicle. And they've actually made a big show of that at Herbivore this year as well. But in just the last couple of weeks, let's see, there's been May Mobility. There's been a Chinese one called Momenta. Before that, you had VW's Moya. You had AV Rides. So I think the May Mobility one announced last week, starting in Texas, which is really emerging as a AV hub. And yeah, those iconic minivans, May Mobility, going to be on the Uber app, right?
Exactly. And it's really fascinating. Speaking of other Herbivore people on stage, Brad Templeton, who was there, had a piece in Forbes on this about this sort of ongoing, this interesting, mutual, not quite a duopoly, but the Uber Waymo pairing in place seems very interesting at the moment because, yeah, Uber is funneling all that traffic into Waymos. Uber seems to be making this concerted play, at least for now, that they want to be that UX layer for all the AV players and striking these deals. It will be interesting to see, like, at one point, Uber's own AV ambitions rise to the surface again, or Waymo does decide they want to be a consumer brand. So I don't know, this whole space is really interesting because they are all jockeying for which piece of the stack that they want to play out. And yes, it appears that, I don't know, at least for the moment, barring some other new partnership, Uber is going to sort of be content to be the consumer brand while they be the providers. But I can't imagine that's the ideal business model for if you're Waymo or May or any of them to justify your incredible capital expenditures on creating autonomous vehicles.
Yeah, just kind of making the hardware partners a sort of plug and play,
Yeah, who wants to be a
no brand equity, no consumer facing relationship. Yeah, but skips the hassle of having to kind of buy the customer. But yeah, then you can just be kind of, oh hey, if Waymo's offering me 10 cents a mile, but May Mobility's offering me 9 cents a mile, it's it's nothing more than just a race to the bottom from their perspective.
These are the kinds of news stories that make me wish I'd gone to business school. Because yes, this is exactly the kind of strategic decision making you just are faced with every day in this business.
I think it's a clever one from Uber's part, and so that's why to me it's interesting that you have Travis Kay in the sidelines, kind of saying, "Oh, my technique was going to be better. Never mind the tragedy." So I
Well,
think.
and ongoing Dara as in the saddle at Uber, of course, showing this ongoing proclivity to like remake it in Expedia's image in the sense of we're just going to be this platform. We're going to stick everything on it. We're going to be a consumer brand, and everybody else is a provider to us. So
When's the last time you used Expedia.com though?
that depends on the sub brand. I'm still kind of a loyal
You an
Orbit
Orbitz guy?
user. I'm an Orbitz guy, and sometimes don't hate me for that.
Well, and so just kind of wrapping up the strings on this topic. I also thought interesting. One of the players, Momenta, Chinese only. Uber, obviously a multinational brand at this point. So I think again, depends on the terms of the partnership, but the fact that they can be collecting driving data in multiple geographies, deploying that across all sorts of different regulatory environments. That to me, that's interesting, right? That really I think speaks to the breadth of these deals.
Well, it also, I mean, harkens back to obviously when Uber had a China strategy before they cashed out of that one. I mean, is this, can you leverage that kind of data? Can you leverage that kind of policy expertise? Is this the rise of a new level of Uber globalization in that regard? And can they rise from those ashes? I think is a very interesting question as well. I mean, I guess if you're just striking partners and you've built the whole UX, you can maybe leverage those learnings across geographies.
And so then on the other side of the AV duopoly, Zag Daily had an interesting piece about recent Waymo data that I think hammers home sort of the optimistic case for robotaxis, right? That really these are safer, they're more courteous drivers, they don't run over cyclists, they stop at every four-way stop sign. To me, it's the classic trade-off, right? More cars on the road because you've made the barrier to entry lower, but these cars are behaving well. They're not just revving their engines and doing donuts for fun. Uh,
Yes, they're not on ongoing group chat calls with several continents at the same time. I mean, two thoughts on it. I'd be curious to see from our listenership how many folks have ridden in a Waymo, or yeah, let's say a Waymo in one of their geographies at this point. I've done it in Phoenix, Scottsdale a handful of times, and yes, the two takeaways are always like, wow, this is a super polite, sedate ride. It's on street level traffic, et cetera. And then of course how banal it actually is because you're still in a car.
yeah.
But the other one is like, I agree the critics of Waymo and AVs in general, which is that, and this news story is an
The
interesting
David
point.
Zippers of the world.
Yeah, the Zippers of the world, Paris Marxes of the world, those are arguing that, yeah, particularly Zipper, though, arguing that, like, safety was never the point. It's not the point of the business model, but it is a convenient and actually accurate story to actually sell this to the public. They are, in fact, safer, and we do, in fact, sacrifice 40,000 Americans a year in fatal crashes and collisions on the altar of our automotive, civilization. So more power to them. That is a policy point that works. And, of course, this is where I would come back to agreeing with Zipper is that you run the risk of building the world ever more in the autonomous car's image and all
Yeah.
of the urban geometry and externality problems that come out of that one. So I don't
Yeah.
know.
Or just sprawling further because you can now be napping on your 2 hour commute.
Well, what do we call that? Roy's laws. Alex Roy stole in that one. Can you sleep in it? Then it's
Roy's
autonomous.
Razor. Yeah.
Roy's razor. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, it's a good one. But there you are.
No, and I think again for anyone that hasn't been in an AV yet, and I know we've got listeners all over the world, it's fascinating, right? The first time you see it, it's oh my god, the Jetsons have finally arrived. This is so cool, super futuristic. You're a little giddy, you're a little nervous. No one's turning that wheel. Second time, it's boring. You're in a car. You're sitting in the back. It's just a Uber driver that doesn't talk to you. So I suppose in a way that's a sign of technological maturity because you don't think about your phone when you turn it on; it just works. So, um, but it's not just about consumer AVs, right, Greg? There's another segment. I know you're kind of giddy about this one.
Yeah, I'm fascinated with this one. So last week, I would say I happened to be in Texas when this happened, but last week, Aurora, which I think is best known for Chris Urmson, who is, again, everything goes back to Waymo and the Google AV program.
And
Chris Urmson was one of the
Pittsburgh and
yeah, exactly. The Carnegie Mellon crew. But yeah, the face of that program a decade ago. But yeah, Aurora, which is his autonomous trucking company, announced that they are now fully autonomous on the Dallas Houston corridor. There are semi trucks, no one at the wheel, no safety driver on board, just barreling down the freeway. I forget that interstate off the top of my head, but anyway, they announced that, and so yeah, so they're out there. And what's also interesting again is that their top customer in both prototype phase and now is Uber Freight. So there you go, Uber playing again in the equation there, figuring out which the robotics trucking companies are going to be at work and how to get in early there too. So.
Uber Freight, the kind of ugly redheaded stepchild of the Uber empire in terms of no one thinks about it and hasn't really grown much in the last couple of years, but trucking along, I suppose, is a good billion-dollar business, kind of doing freight matchmaking, right?
And yeah, like I mean, it's interesting. Robotics trucking. I believe it was. I forget off the top of my head, but there was, of course, one of those startups. So I betray my ignorance here. That cashed out and famously published a letter that like autonomy was a lot harder than we thought it would be. I do think that that trucking is such an obvious use case for this. In addition to like all those middle miles on freeways versus handling tight corners in various freight lots. Trucking is incredibly difficult, unglamorous, hard job to do, which is why there are so many openings in it. I mean, it's trucking is a very much an interesting canary in the coal mine from employment and automation, given that trucking is a very populous job, particularly for lower educated men in most states. But if people wanted to truck, they would do it, and they wouldn't have a constant difficulty trying to fill those jobs.
Yeah,
so
you wouldn't see every trailer on the back of it says, "We're hiring, please, warm bodies." I also think interesting that Texas has sort of emerged as a hotspot for AV trucking in particular, that congested Dallas-Houston corridor. Obviously, lots of truck demand, but also the state's kind of come forward with a pretty regulatory light touch, let's say, to encourage the growth of this.
And fortunately, thanks to federal trade policy, there will be less crossings at the border soon. So we'll work on that.
There'll be a lot more empty trucks, I suppose. But and then this, of course, ties into longtime listeners will know our favorite subject, SPACs, special purpose acquisition corporations, companies, corporations, either way, which after a long post-ZERP hiatus seem to be kind of bubbling back up. This sort of represented, I think, maybe the darkest side of startup ZERP mania, where just companies with no business going public went public because they could, and you can kind of dump it on the retail investor. So maybe this time there'll be a little bit more diligence, knock on wood, fingers crossed. But the latest company to go down this route is another AV trucker, Kodiak Robotics. And,
following in the footsteps of Aurora, which did it before. So this is the path forward, apparently. But
so Kodiak's raised about $250 million so far, and this time I think they're trying to let's see, like go pull off like $500 million or something. I forgot what the stat was, but not the multi-billion, multi-trillion kind of scale we were seeing a couple years ago, but still serious money.
Yeah, no, again, I think Riley Brennan, shout out to Riley, in his last newsletter pointed out that like Aurora is worth a third of Waymo there. So it raises interesting questions about, number one, is it undervalued compared to the consumer prospects, given the difficulty of scaling that, or does Waymo and the others rush to start doing trucking now that we're starting to crack the trucking nut? So it'd be interesting to see whether that makes sense as a sort of AV conglomerate. But
Waymo had a trucking product that they were doing for a couple of years, and then in the sort of the AV nadir of 2023 or whatever that was, they kind of sloughed it off. Not the only kind of financial fun story that I'm tracking this week. Anyone knows that I've got a soft spot in my heart for car sharing, and so Envoy Technologies, which was doing, I guess you'd call it community-oriented car sharing. Car sharing as an amenity. How would you describe it, Greg?
I think it was car sharing amenity. And I would say, shout out there. I would say, my Commotion days, I brought in Eric Ohana and Envoy into the fold because I always thought they represented a fascinating model of how you might deploy mobility, which is, you are the owner or developer of a luxury, multifamily building in Miami, and instead of, I guess people in that case might want to own their own cars unless we see this, but the idea of like, here is our private car sharing fleet. These cars will be available to you. They will be charged. You could do this. I've worked on any number of foresight exercises that thought about this, whether you were malls or offices or anything. You could have all sorts of provisioning of mobility by asset owners, real estate asset owners, and he pushed forward on it, and the results have been mixed, let's say.
Yeah, the challenge that we often saw, at Turo or anyone at Zipcar could tell you is that it's a tragedy of the commons thing, right? You see this car, it's not yours. You use it for a couple hours, and when you're done with it, why clean it up? Why refill the tank? Why care about it? But the idea with Envoy was that, hey, it's it's not just anyone's, it's your apartment buildings or it's your office campuses. So those are people that you see in the hallway every day, people you might have a relationship with. So don't trash the vehicle because you'll feel bad and they'll know it was you. And so that's, I think, honestly, a good question if it's worked. It'd be interesting to see their stats on maintenance and vehicle longevity. But at least from a financial standpoint, it does not seem like it's been a silver bullet. They sold it to Blink Charging, which has had its own struggles like any kind of big EV
Right, it was
charging
like
network.
vertically roll it up here. Here, we'll have something that we can actually charge. It seemed to make sense on paper at the time, but
Yep, yep. But they're now trying to spin it back out, doing a direct listing. And so it's going to be tough as a public company. Last year, they lost about $14 million on $4 million in revenue. So even if they can get that loss in check, that's not very much money for a publicly listed company to be doing all the accounting and audits and finances and calls. So best of luck.
but if someone has a really small SPAC, you know who to look for.
That's if you need someone to promote it in a negative sense. All attention is good attention, right?
I would say I don't have a blank check. I bet someone might actually. In fact, there you gotta find the right acquisition for the right size of the check.
And so then I think that's a nice segue. So we're thinking about car sharing. We're thinking about carpooling.
Other models of car sharing here. This one from coming in from our partners over at Zag. I thought this was really fascinating. So I'll let you cue it up here. But BlaBlaCar out of France, fascinating story around I don't know cultural differences, particularly in the European context, but also interesting because BlaBlaCar, which we'll get to, was one of Robin Chase's, founder of Zipcar, of course, which is still going. And yeah, Robin took a detour to France to launch carpooling, which I, as an American, always thought was this whole like really weird, zagging as you will. While others were zigging, she
Yeah.
was zagging there. But yeah, what's the latest piece from Zag over this?
And yeah, just to set reader expectations. So carpooling, I feel like in the U.S. kind of has the commuting context. BlaBlaCar is more about long distance carpooling. So you're driving, overnight from city A to city B, or you're going to a festival or something.
I would say a
So
business model that's only existed for like university students in the United States in the 90s. I mean, does
yeah,
anyone even
yeah,
do that in the
big
States
big
now?
Craigslist energy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, BlaBlaCar has taken off. It's like a big French mobility success story. I think they're profitable in certain years. Millions of rides, but they've expanded to other geographies like Germany. But the UK has been a struggle for them, and so yeah, I think just kind of interesting questions about both geography, right? Smaller country, maybe less places to motor to, but also cultural questions, right? Like they're saying that when people are talking about carpooling online, they're way more likely to talk about how scary it is or what can go wrong or the fact that you could be attacked in a vehicle. And then I think there's also the policy parts, right? Like in France, they've kind of cracked down on short distance flights. That's not the case in the UK. So I guess the question is like, what's wagging the tail here?
Well, it's funny reading that news item. I was reminded of like, oh right, this is why Brexit happened. Like it's the British. Also Knife Island. I mean, yes, there is that level of, and also just sort of underscores how many mobility innovations have been hampered by cultural norms and practices, fears of public space. I mean,
Yeah.
these usual things that always rear their heads. But yeah, but to me the interesting question is like the scale of the use in France. It's like why are the French different? I didn't take this way as like why are the British different? Why are the French different that this model works there at a scale that it is not for us? And yeah, you're right. The public policy piece is there with the ban on short haul flights, and public policy is important for our next item as well too. But yeah, I'd be very curious. I don't know for any budding sociologists out there working on PhDs. Like, let's find out what the norms and practices of long haul carpooling and like how do we replicate those.
I will happily do a multi-year assignment in France to get to the bottom of this one. The only thing I can add is that I advised a startup many years ago that was trying to make the same model work in the U.S. And yeah, we sort of had it working on college campuses because of the classic. Oh, you go to college out in the boonies, and every spring break, every Christmas break, whatever, big tranche of kids want to get back to the main city to see family, fly home, whatever. And we got it to work for that, and we got it to work for festivals and kind of special occasions where there already is sort of, again, like an affinity group. Hey, we're all going to this place. Let's start the party soon. But I think to get it working on like a larger, just sort of anytime travel scale, I don't know, maybe if you tapped it into like an Uber or someone that already had the demand there, but the fact that you just have to be building all this awareness and demand and sort of new user behavior, that's a very expensive puzzle to try and solve.
Yes, and culturally we're headed in the opposite direction, where people are willing to pay a premium so they can sit alone in the front passenger seat of a vehicle while it drives itself. So it'll be
Oh,
interesting
you
to
sit
see.
in the front? That's creepy.
I, it, I, well, for those of you listening who have not taken an AV, I have to recommend it's really weird to put your bag in the empty driver's seat while the wheel turns itself and you sit alone in the passenger seat. It is, if you want uncanny, it's certainly uncanny. But yeah, to me, it's the sociability of long distance carpooling that I just find funny. I just imagine Americans' skin recoiling at this idea of having to make small talk with a stranger. I mean, that's probably the thing people hate most about flying, let alone long haul carpooling.
Yep, yep.
But
Speaking of solo travel, not anything that you do alone is succeeding in those. So I think we've seen cargo bikes with a kind of up-down trajectory. So another Zag piece celebrating that Pedal Me, a kind of British player, is doing free cargo bike deliveries for a London IKEA. Hopefully not too big of a IKEA order, but I think interesting space that's struggled, right? We saw a lot of momentum in it a couple years ago. Again, maybe Zerp fueled. There were players like Zetify and FinMile. I feel like every British startup has a really strange name. But yeah, Zetify is now in administration, which is, again, Britishism for bankruptcy. I think FinMile is still going strong, but like not expanding the way they might have hoped a couple years ago. So I don't know. It's obviously hard to shift purchasing behavior, but if you can sign this contract with the big delivery firms, they don't care if it's a truck or a bike. They just want it to be a penny cheaper per pound.
yes,
But
I say there we go. It's all unit economics in that regard. And I mean, I guess my takeaway part of that is like I was like, okay, how much more stringent can the public policy get? I mean, you have places like London with the ultra low emission zone, and I suppose you can, you have various bans on cars in city centers. But if we cannot make electric cargo bike delivery work in urban centers where there has been a dedicated effort to
yeah,
basically limit like internal combustion engine van traffic, then how is that going to pencil out? And it does seem like the push there. I mean, the universal form factor that's centralizing around this is the electric van. It's always funny. I'm here in Montreal. I subscribe to Lufa Farms, which sort of our pioneering green market delivery weekly stuff, and it's all electric Rivian vans, which is very interesting how they're getting their hands on that. So yeah, I'm curious whether they're just never going to be able to make the unit economics work in time to fend off that Challenger as a vehicle type, given the lack of, I don't know, even more stringent policy in this one. But yeah, we all had high hopes that we were going to have silent electric, boosted cargo bikes gliding around European city centers, and now that seems in danger, unfortunately.
yep, yep. And speaking of electric bikes, one close to home, but I think also again kind of interesting, snake eating its tail. Lime is bringing back e-bikes to the LA region. Shared e-bikes, both here and everywhere have had kind of interesting up-down, usurped by scooters, but then making a comeback. Fighting with municipal bike share operators. So personally, I'm excited to see these back because sometimes you want to sit, you don't want to just stand on that scooter. I don't know.
I mean, amen to that. But my first thought on seeing this headline is like, oh, did you take the jump bikes out of landfill? Like, is that what you're doing, Lime? Like, hey, you had a perfectly good fleet of that once. So,
Yeah,
but yes, no, the e-bike. I think
an
we're all
expensively learned lesson. Yeah,
indeed. I think we're all in agreement here that like e-bikes are the ideal form factor for this. I don't know. Scooter files can really can take issue with that one, but yeah, the seated comfort of an electric bike and that assist, I just don't think anything matches to it. But
yeah. I got room in my heart for both a e-bike and a scooter, but there's a time and place where one makes sense and not the other. Rolling through a couple more headlines. I'm a big delivery watcher. So this one's interesting. DoorDash offering to buy Deliveroo for 3.6 billion. For those not as nuanced, not familiar with the nuances of food delivery. Deliveroo is a British headquartered 3PD with again kind of international footprint. DoorDash, the biggie here in the United States, again has a kind of different brands across the world. They bought Volt a few years back, and so they have a European footprint. But I think this consolidation makes sense in terms of different geographies. $3.6 billion shows you how much some of these kind of smaller 3PDs have shrunk in terms of market capitalization. I guess the question is like, will EU regulators allow it to pass? That's an interesting time for kind of consolidation business practices, right?
Indeed, yeah, the Highlander-esque, for those who remember that '80s film. There can be only one. Like, strikes me as what's going to happen with the three PDs. Obviously, not quite that far here, but like plenty of room for consolidation there, especially after, like, again, still working our way through the ZERP hangover all these years later and the fallout of all those various companies. My question is, what has been the response from the delivery board on this? Like, it seems like it's been fairly muted here. Like, they're not jumping at this. They are not declaring poison pill stuff on this, but I'm curious what the latest scuttlebutt is there.
They seemed interested. I feel like they put out like a very, sort of British stiff upper lip response, but it
Very
was like
terse,
reading
terse
through it.
official response. Yeah.
What is it? Yeah, it was would be minded to recommend such an offer to shareholders. So if that's not love, I don't know what it is. And then how about one more headline before we get to everyone's favorite little news quiz? This one,
Oh God.
honestly, Greg, I'll say, like, we've been off the air for what, 5 months or so. The world has kind of exploded since then. We've done a very good job of avoiding certain topics the first 30 minutes of the show. But for anyone that was worried about this, fear not any longer. The DOT, the U.S. DOT, I should say, will cut funds to transportation projects with DEI, says Secretary Duffy. So I know people were really worried about that. So our long national nightmare is over.
Yeah, I would say that we could retroactively talk about this at length. I mean, obviously, ongoing fears. I believe Matt Iglesias had a Bloomberg opinion piece on the potential U.S. transit spiral that's looming if we see these kinds of cutbacks on this. Lots discussed there. My only contribution to this line of discourse, particularly with a lot of the very hasty effort to remove all DEI at the behest of the U.S. federal government, is that a couple of years ago when ChatGPT dropped, and I was still at Cornell Tech, we were discussing how large language models be utilized to either cut through the complexity of environmental review and these kinds of bureaucratic frameworks, or used to weaponify them. But yes, obviously it's using ChatGPT or Claude to rewrite your entire grant proposal to remove anything that might possibly have one of the banned words on it by DOT. But there we are. I shudder to think how you might use the word inclusion and other sort of meanings of words that have more than one.
Yep. On that cheery note, I think we should get to what I believe is listeners' favorite segment, where it's Can We Stump Greg? And honestly, the track record for stumping Greg, pretty good. You wouldn't know he was a multi-time Jeopardy champion.
I was just gonna say, no activity makes me regret more my appearance on Jeopardy than this quiz.
We like to end things with a little ego blow to Greg. This time I picked a particularly bad subject in terms of just guess a random number. Our favorite brand Tesla, their CEO has been in the news lately, if you haven't followed. So it's having an impact on sales. So there's fresh numbers out of Spain where so they have basically Tesla sales for the first 4 months of the year compared to the prior year period. So did they change, Greg? Did they fall 54%, 37%, 17%, or 9%?
Oh man, the reign of Tesla share price in Spain falls on the plane. Two things of context. We could have mentioned, but we did not, because we assume everyone's heard this by now, but the Wall Street Journal reported that the Tesla board might be kind of thinking about replacing Elon as CEO, to which, of course...
Or are they just leaking that to get him to pay attention to his prize pony?
Yes, well, given Tesla is effectively a meme stock at this point, I mean, I don't blame them for that one. But yeah, that was newsworthy. And yeah, to frame my guess for this one, I have not seen the exact answer to this one, but given that there was a poll, I think with like of 10,000 or 100,000 Germans online, 94% said they would never buy a Tesla, which is, I mean, there you go, universal rejection. So I'm going to assume the Spaniards are a bit more lenient, but not too much more. And I'm going to go with the high estimate, 54%. Not rewarded for being bold on this one? What was it? More conservative 37%? What was it?
It was just a mere 17% fall. Although I will say it seems to be accelerated because just April versus April prior, that was down 36%. So it could be, by the time we play this game again, it could be in a steeper cliff.
And in light of the Spanish blackout, which they are, various critics are laying at the footsteps of renewable energy here, perhaps if you start unplugging those Teslas from the grid, you will have more grid reliability.
Or if we finally get that two-way charging we've been promised. Maybe that'll be their saving grace. And so then this is a
I agree.
two-part quiz for Greg. So the question is, obviously there are other makers of EVs and hybrids. So how did their sales do over that same period? Did they crater 34%? Did they dip 11%? Were they, more or less flat at 2%, or did they spike 54%?
This is a good question. Again, did not see it. I have lost. I must confess, I have lost perfect track of where the EU was on its various tariffs on Chinese EVs. There's
Yeah.
so many tariffs, Jonah. I can't keep track of them all, let alone other countries' tariffs. But I'm gonna go with the fact that like yes, I'm gonna double down, take on the high estimate again, and I'm gonna assume that like yes, like the irresistibility, the unstoppable force of ultra long range, cheap Chinese EVs means that those sales are booming. And I'm gonna go, particularly given the really clean mix of sources into the Spanish grid. The silver lining of the whole blackout is people paying attention to how many renewables are in it and how varied their mix is. So I'm gonna say 54%. I'm gonna say Spaniards are jumping on these clean electrons and they're buying EVs.
Ding, ding, ding. Greg has finally gotten it right. Yes, so the death of EVs has been perhaps a little overhyped. They are booming, 54% growth in Spain, and they're just not Teslas. So pretty good. Greg gets a pat on the back, and I think with that kind of happy end of the show, let's kick things over to Zach Rash. We're here with Zach Rash, co-founder and CEO of Coco Robotics. Hey, Zach.
Hey, Jonah. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited about this one because obviously I love delivery robots. I feel like if anyone's just been geeking about this for, I don't know, half a decade now, it's me. So it's, I'm fanboying here. But I think why don't we just start at the beginning then? Like, I love robots, you love robots, but clearly you love robots so much that you made them your life's passion. Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I was at UCLA with my co-founder Brad, and we were studying computer science and electrical engineering. We had formed this robotics research group, so we were doing a lot of actually things that kind of died off and are now really popular again. It was a lot of reinforcement learning for robotics. So that was the area we thought was going to be the highest impact, and we just couldn't really get anywhere with it. And now that's seeming to come back full circle here. Um, but we spent a lot of time on robotics research, and as we were graduating, we wanted to get robots out into the real world, as every researcher eventually wants. And Brad and I just spent a lot of time looking at the space, talking to different companies in the space, and I think everyone had a pretty consistent approach. That did not revolve around operations, running a business, actually creating a service, working backwards from like the merchant or the customer to say, how do we actually get this into the world and make it sustainable? And I get it because like full size AVs, it needs to work way above human standards before you can commercialize it. But not everything has to work that way, right? Food delivery is moving at much slower speeds. You're not transporting people, so there's a lot of reasons that you can safely release that with a kind of a different approach. And we didn't think anybody was doing that, so we felt kind of compelled to do it ourselves. And I never figured out why it was so contrarian. Basically, we started by saying we're going to make very inexpensive vehicles and we're going to teleoperate them. And that's
Yeah.
all we're going to do. And we're going to build all of the product and the boring infrastructure service layer around that and start day one with a restaurant and say, how do we make this useful to you? Like, how do we get, how do we make this product actually solve your pain points? And eventually the cost will come down because we have people using the product. It's creating a good experience. And you have all this human data to then train the AI system. So that order of operation seems super intuitive, but I just think there was this big bias of like, you can't be a robotics company that doesn't focus on self-driving, or you're like, fake or fraudulent, or it's like some toy product that's not actually going to make an impact. And the number of people that told me that was super surprising to me.
Oh, ouch. um, I think you've clearly done well for yourself. And if there's one thing I've noticed in the same space that, yeah, sometimes people oversolve, or they come up with like what's a cool technical experiment that they find intellectually interesting. And then all of a sudden you have like this dancing six-axis robot that just like, well, that's kind of overkill. Like you don't need that. You need a cooler on wheels.
Yeah, the way I was explaining this is I was like, I would way rather be building the things that other companies are building. It's way more interesting from an engineering perspective. It's just like it's not the right thing to start with, and so I get why there's this bias because it's like the fun, flashy problem, and it probably raises great money when you do a demo. But I just think the fundamental sequencing of that is going to set you up for a difficult path.
Yeah, if you want to build something that cool, you should just go work for JPL.
Yeah.
When I kind of cued this interview, is you guys have obviously been making some splashes lately. I feel like you were quiet for a few years. Now all of a sudden you're doing a bunch of new cities launches. You're in Chicago, you're in Helsinki, you're going where it's cold. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, we've been really heads down and not talking about anything for a while, and we're starting to change that. So we're based in Los Angeles. We've been super focused on LA. I mean, especially when interest rates shot up and everything, right? Like our approach was actually the best approach for that time period, because we were fundamentally trying to create a profitable business. Creating a profitable business in this space, especially with our approach, right, is just like you have to do thousands of small things really well, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's a lot of engineering work to build a really reliable service. We're transporting mostly perishable food, so you have like a 15-minute window to get from A to B. These vehicles have to sit outside all day, every day. So building all of the product and infrastructure and hardware engineering around supporting that is quite difficult. So that took us a few years to get there, and our kind of key milestone was we wanted Los Angeles to be profitable. So we wanted to get to a price point where our customers would say, "Let's go everywhere with this. This makes a ton of sense. This solves a lot of our key, pain points and business problems." But we wanted to make sure we were profitable doing that. And I don't think that's ever been done before, in like autonomous urban delivery. So
So
uh,
you're saying you're profitable on a per market basis.
yeah, yeah. So we got, late last year we got Los Angeles to be profitable. So now we're starting to expand pretty rapidly. So as you pointed out, we just did Helsinki, Finland, and then recently just launched Chicago as well.
And what kind of scale in LA did it take to crack that from into the red into the black?
It's the most important thing is, obviously for this business is actually like a very local scale. So it's the utilization of the robot. How many trips can it do per hour, per day? Because like fundamentally, autonomous vehicles is mostly a fixed cost business, whereas traditional food delivery would be a pure variable cost
Sure.
business, which they each have their pros and cons, right? And this is, Uber talks about this quite a bit with the hybrid network. You guys actually talk about this quite a bit too. Like the gig worker model has this a beautiful ability to say between 6 and 8 p.m. we need twice the number of drivers on the road.
Yeah.
So they can flex up supply to kind of meet that peak demand. Robots are terrible at doing that because you do have to either way over deploy for peak, or you're gonna have to staff for some baseline and be under deployed for peak. So the kind of north star for us is how do we take this baseline volume and make sure that the vehicles are just busy all day every day, and what's that right number look like? And that's a conversation with our customers like Uber Eats, customers like the restaurants, any type of merchant, to understand what is that right staffing level to meet your needs. So that's the big thing, is like the vehicles need to be busy all day. And then just a lot of progress on the vehicle reliability, right? I mean, how often do you have to repair the vehicle? How often does it break down? How often do you have to charge it? What is like how expensive are those repairs?
Yeah.
Um, what's the staffing model around supporting those repairs? Of course, we are a mix of autonomous and teleoperated now, as kind of
And we'll get
everyone
into that in
is
a second. Yeah, I'm
as
excited
kind of
about that one
everyone
too.
is in this space. But
Yeah.
like that's the other big thing, is when you do use a teleoperator, how optimized is that cost? And that's a lot of kind of uh, you know deep software scheduling, and assignment logic that we had to build out, across time zones and everything. So just a lot of, there's not like one big thing. It's just like removing touch points basically from every part of the stack is kind of the North Star.
Keep fixing enough little things, eventually it adds up.
Yeah.
Um, but so again, why Chicago? Why Helsinki? I mean, there's a lot of cities in the world. Everyone eats. You picked two particularly cold, windy, icy ones.
Yeah, so and especially coming from LA where the weather's perfect all year. Um, I think the biggest thing was, we went to Helsinki, and we launched there with a company called Volt, which is the kind of European
DoorDash
subsidiary of
owned.
DoorDash.
Yeah.
So they're one of the largest food delivery companies in Europe. They're based in Helsinki. So we started there. It was an interesting opportunity. So we're like, let's go do it. Let's try it. And once we're over there, I think we learned a few things pretty quickly. Um, the density of Europe was incredible. So Europe's going to be a big focus for us, right? All of the deliveries are pretty short distance, and even like less dense or less populous areas like Helsinki. everyone is still pretty clustered. Even if you go out into the suburbs, everyone's clustered right next to each other. So it's very walkable. It's not a very car-based culture. A lot of the food deliveries are happening on e-bikes. So that made a lot of sense. It's super expensive up there. So
High
the
labor costs. Yeah.
cost of getting food delivery is really high. But then to your question about winter, I think like we're going to be really focused on these markets that have extreme weather, really cold weather, because it is really hard as a kind of contracted marketplace to manage supply and demand when you have these huge weather, this huge weather variability, right? Summer in Helsinki is extremely pleasant. It's like 70 degrees and it's light out, until midnight. So they have actually a ton of supply, and less demand because people take all of July off. People are out in the parks. But in the winter, it's dark all day. It's freezing outside. There's ice and snow and slush everywhere, and so nobody wants to leave their house, even to go to like the coffee shop around the corner. Um, so demand skyrockets, but at the same time, not the same number of drivers want to be delivering those conditions. And especially it is a lot of e-bikes, and so it's pretty miserable to deliver in those conditions with an
Yeah.
e-bike. So that's not to say there's no drivers, but supply definitely plummets. And so robots have this amazing opportunity where we can complement the human drivers and say, we will give you X dedicated 24/7 guaranteed supply. And that massively improves the experience for the customer because they have a reliable service. They know a robot's going to be delivering it. We can tell them exactly when we're delivering it. And they can do that in any weather conditions. And that also obviously brings the cost down because you have to pay drivers a lot more to get on the road when the conditions are terrible, right? So I actually think those markets where it's very undesirable to drive are naturally like a great place for robots, as long as we are very good at solving traction and kind of extreme weather driving conditions, which we've been learning a lot from up there. But I think we have a really good product for it.
I mean, that makes total sense, but it kind of gets back to the base versus peak question, right? Where if you're solving winter, but there's no problem in summer, maybe you just need to get all the robots on an airplane, take them down to like Patagonia so you can just be hitting different seasonality.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a big part of the discussions, right? Is we make it very clear that like when we put a fleet out, that fleet's not gonna contract, right? It can grow, but once it grows, it's gonna stay there too, right? We're not gonna be pulling these things out and putting them in a different market and then bringing them back. So we are not giving like a December supply number, right? We expect it to kind
Yeah.
of be a baseline. And like I mean, try to get something delivered at 3 in the morning in Helsinki, right? I don't like that, and this is any company is going to struggle to do that. It would be miserable to manage drivers out there. Now, there's not that much demand, but like if you are the person ordering at that time, as I was all the time because I was trying to work LA hours and it's 10 hours ahead, I'm ordering food at crazy hours. It's super hard to get you have no idea when the food's coming.
Sure.
It's just no one driving. It's so I think we can make a big difference there.
And what about in Chicago? What would have been the interesting learnings there?
Yeah, so similar dynamic with the cold weather and supply and demand balance. The weather's like even more extreme in Chicago. I mean, Chicago is really cold. I've been in Helsinki for a while, and I was like, yeah, this is pretty cold, but Chicago's pretty next level cold.
Helsinki,
Um,
you know Chicago.
we had like the other day, we were all celebrating because we're like our team that's over there is like, guys, it hit 20 degrees today, like it's so warm. 'Cause it's been like -5 or something. um yeah, Chicago's been great. It's brand new. We just got on the ground there. We're kind of in the River West Loop area, kind of west of the kind of financial business district. And we're expanding that area right now to cover a broader set of Chicago. But it's been going super well. The infrastructure in Chicago is pretty great, and a lot of deliveries. It's great. It's a great food city. So there's a lot of really
Sure.
great brands. So that rollout's been great.
And is that I know it's sort of a pilot. Was that like the city launched a pilot process, or you guys did the like? How's the actual rollout worked?
Yeah, and this is pretty typical for most of the cities. So there's a phased approach. So we limit it to a specific number of wards, work directly with the aldermen in those wards, limited deployment. They make sure everything's smooth, and then the policy kind of can incorporate a larger rollout. That's obviously pretty common. People will say, okay, let's test this, and this is like credit to the city of Chicago. Like that's exactly how you should do this, right? Like let's make sure this is safe. Let's make sure that people want this. Let's make sure this makes sense for our city. And then let's test it. And if it is working and everyone's happy, then we'll keep expanding it. And that is a very lightweight framework to say, like, let's evaluate things pretty quickly. So some cities do that a lot better than others.
Yeah.
And the city of Helsinki's been awesome to work with. So they've also been really great throughout this whole process. So um,
And one thing that I really find fascinating about delivery robots as compared to say, TNCs or micromobility is that it can work on a neighborhood specific business because you're basically serving from the restaurant to a nearby consumer back forth, back forth. You don't have the kind of really like polycentric model of, okay, a scooter's been taken from neighborhood A to B, then B to C. So you can make it work on a small basis and actually prove the economics.
Yeah, the vehicles do, like, sometimes they do traverse neighborhoods, but then we run this kind of demand supply demand forecasting algorithm that will tell us like how many to put in each pocket at the beginning of the day, and we look at that how that evolves each week, and then we modify it. But like we have a lot of vehicles in like West LA. Those end up in Westwood and UCLA a lot. And so sometimes they'll end up there and then they'll get stuck there doing orders. And then that tells us we didn't have enough vehicles in Westwood in the first place. So they do traverse neighborhoods. You obviously want it to avoid like having all of your vehicles kind of get pulled into a different neighborhood and have
Yeah.
no supply in the other neighborhood. But that's a fairly straightforward problem to solve. But we do think about the business, to your point, like at a neighborhood level, right? Either our large merchant partners a lot of times actually store the vehicles, charge the vehicles. They'll even do basic cleaning, maintenance, and repair. And so we do really look at a deployment at like a neighborhood or a collection of neighborhood level. And so all the vehicles at night kind of aggregate back to this kind of hub. And we either manage that ourselves with like a storage containers, or we work with the merchants to do it, which is obviously the preferred model.
Very cool. And so your other big announcement as of late has been on the autonomy front, partnering with RoboSense. And so I feel like for a while, Coco was almost proudly the teleoperated one, where a lot of your competitors, they sort of pretended they were fully autonomous and everyone kind of knew, wink, wink, like still often teleops, but you guys leaned into the teleops. But now you're kind of making your own way down the transition. So what's changed?
Yeah, so well on RoboSense in particular, they made a fully solid state, really high quality lidar. And we haven't put lidar. We've been camera only. Even with all of our autonomy running on the vehicles now, that's all been camera only. It's just like we were never going to put a 10, 20, 30,000 dollars spinning puck on the top of a robot. That was never going to work. That uh, would be a great sensor to have, but then the second that thing flips over onto its lid, I mean, you have to recalibrate or you have to repair that, and that's
I would say
more than.
if the copper scrappers ever figure out that they can just be making 10K a pop with a crowbar,
Yeah,
game over.
you very much want every component to be inexpensive. Also, like one of the things people don't think about, if you cover like multiple continents and multiple cities, you have to store inventory, part inventory, each of those. So you also, from like obviously from like a cash flow perspective, you want inventory amounts to be minimal and not expensive and modular.
Yeah.
And if I had to put like, 10% of the fleet in redundant LiDAR in each city, that's going to be incredibly expensive. Um, and then that repair is going to suck every single time it has to happen, right? So it was just like off the table. But RoboSense has made a great product. So I mean, this thing is very inexpensive. It's super durable because there's no moving parts on it whatsoever. I mean, it's just like a chip, right? And then it's got this glass cover over it. So it's repairable. It's inexpensive. It's super high quality. Like the thing works really well, right? There's been kind of solid state sensors that you could use for depth, and just the quality is not good enough. So they've made a really great product. So we're integrating that into all of our vehicles now, and we'll be integrating that into the next gen design as well.
What's the pricing like? I mean, ballpark,
I probably shouldn't comment on their pricing.
or like an order of magnitude compared to a standard, solution.
Oh yeah, I mean it's like it's in the hundreds of dollars, right?
Wow.
It's not,
Wow.
we're not talking thousands of dollars here.
Well, let's
And
put those in all those messed up Teslas then.
you'd have to ask them, but if you buy 10 of them or 100 of them, you might be paying thousands of dollars. But like they like RoboSense is manufacturing lidar at scale for all the Chinese OEMs, so they
Yeah.
they have they have like serious economies of scale. So we placed we our orders are over in the thousands, so
Yeah.
the price comes down. But they've been a really really awesome partner. And yeah, your question on autonomy, yeah, we were very proudly teleoperated. Everyone's teleoperated. The thing I saw coming was like you're going to run into this problem where, especially like food delivery, where you're going to need to run a reliable service. You're going to need to eventually have people using the product, and they're going to care a lot about average speed
Yeah.
and reliability on that speed. Um, and so if you try to do too many things at once, you're going to have this problem where you're trying to make it autonomous, but then nobody wants to use the product because it's too slow. So then you throw people at it. So then it's like teleoperated, trying to be autonomous, but you didn't design it to be teleoperated. So your economics are going to be terrible. And then you're going to have to like increase your prices to make this sustainable, or you're going to burn more money.
And you're just
So
chasing
it's
your
this
tail.
and so I was like, let's just be super disciplined. Let's teleoperate it, get it to super good quality, get the economics to work. The back of the envelope math should work out. So I was like, this is fundamentally possible to do. And then once we got there, now we have really good baseline. I know exactly as we roll out the autonomy how it's going to impact our average delivery times, our 90th percentile delivery times, our 99th percentile delivery times. Like we can measure the expected delay on every neighborhood, every route segment, right? We have all the infrastructure to do that. And so we can roll out autonomy very thoughtfully to say, we're very confident that the autonomy is good enough that we can change our staffing model. And we can have basically, instead of staffing one pilot per one active trip, we can staff one pilot per two active trips and three active trips. And we will know the impact of that on speed and our delivery times, right? And so that's just like the very disciplined approach. That's like the obvious approach that you need to do in this space.
Yeah.
So we have been developing autonomy, and that's rolled out on all the vehicles now. And The RoboSense lidar is kind of a redundant and extra kind of signal that you can use for those models. So those models all work camera only. The lidar adds a few things. It adds a great ground truthing for your data. So if you want any of your models to be predicting distance using a neural network, you need some sort of ground truth, right? So you want some vehicles that can actually label that data for you.
Sure.
And of course, even if you're training a model that is driving, kind of like what Tesla's been talking a lot about, right, where it takes in video in and it outputs like steering commands. That's what we're doing as well. But even when you do that, as you can see on the Tesla, visualization, you still want to be predicting all these other things.
Yeah.
You want to be predicting scene geometry and all this stuff. So lidar is pretty important for that. And then as we start releasing autonomy, it's an extra safety, redundancy. It's a super reliable sensor that will say, make sure you slow down for objects.
So as you've been building up this new, core functionality, I'm curious, and like, what does the actual company look like? How many engineers? How many teleoperators? How many salespeople? Like, what's they all in LA? All dispersed? Like, what's the actual structure these days?
Yeah, almost everyone's in LA. Like the core team's all in office. We're actually moving offices right now, so I'm at home. But we should be moving in over the weekend. But yeah, the whole team's in Venice. And then we now have teams set up in each of the new markets. So we have a general manager for each city, and they start building out their kind of local team to manage the fleet and manage partnerships and stuff like that. Um, and then we do have a supply chain team that works that's in Asia and works closely with our suppliers. And then we do have like the you know teleop team and the management for that team, and that team's quite large. So core company in LA is like on the order of like 50 people, including operations and teleoperators. It's like many hundreds.
Got it.
But
Cool. What about, let's talk a little bit about your relationships with the third-party delivery platforms, with the individual restaurateurs, with college campuses, which has been, some of your competitors' go-to model. Like, how do you, one, like want customers to interact with you, and how do you want merchants to interact with you?
yeah, so we work with DoorDash and Uber Eats on their marketplaces. So I think and Uber Eats has been very public and vocal about these things where you we can kind of add our vehicles as a fleet on their network, and then they can dispatch orders to us from all the merchants in that area. That's great for us because it gets us great utilization. They send us a ton of orders. They've built a really great product. Like I don't know if you've used the Uber Eats autonomous delivery product, but the user experience is really great. Your tip gets refunded, so you basically opt into to like autonomous delivery, and then it will tell you all the benefits to opting in. One of which is your tip will get refunded if it is assigned to an order to an autonomous vehicle. So I mean that's like a 15% savings, and I'm sure Uber obviously is going to use the technology to drive the cost down over time for the consumer. So
Sure.
there's a great consumer value prop to this. So that's been really awesome. We do also work directly with restaurant groups, of course. We have a few models there. They can tap into the fleet on demand the same way as the kind of marketplace model. But we also have a dedicated model. We will customize vehicles for you, and you can have them dedicated to your store. So naturally, you need to be like a higher volume facility for that. So that works really well for ghost kitchens or like enterprise restaurants.
Yeah.
But that model is really cool because you can kind of brand and take control over that whole experience. So the example I always like to use is like imagine you're McDonald's. You could deliver with this like bright red robot with the golden arches on it. It says like McDonald's delivery vehicle, and when it gets to the customer, it makes some sound. It opens up. Um,
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Yeah.
you have like the milkshake still like getting blended in the back. You have like a fry compartment, and then it like dispenses like the Happy Meal toy, and the kid runs out and grabs it. Right now,
So,
juxtapose
so
that
that's why you're in
experience.
Chicago. I get it.
So juxtapose that experience to the current experience of getting food delivery, right? This was really important for every pizza restaurant, right? They offered delivery, but it wasn't like this commodity, like we're gonna drop it at your door. It was like this is a neighborhood delivery driver that knows your family. You invite him into the house. You
I don't-
you give him like a big cash tip and give him some life advice. Like that's how like pizza delivery worked back in the day, right? And that was a really big part of the value prop, right? Obviously, Domino's is holding on to that because they think that's like an incredibly important part of the delivery experience. We've completely lost that. And I think this is a cool step where you can kind of take that back and say, what do I want the presentation of my food to be like? What do I want that to experience to look like? And I think it's just a way more delightful experience than any alternative. So
Sure.
that's how we work directly with the brands. That's kind of a more complicated model, but I think gives them a lot more control over the experience.
Sure. Yeah, that's I mean, also a good callback. It's sometimes you forget that like even 5 years ago, most of the world it was crazy to get anything besides pizza and maybe Chinese food delivered, and here we are today.
Yeah.
Um, what about funding? So I feel like you guys have been sort of tactically shy about this. You had a big public round a couple years ago, but I think you've probably kept the kitty filled up since then. No.
Yeah, we did our Series A in 2021. That was led by Sam Altman, who has become much more famous than in 2021. So he went from my family being I don't know who that is to my grandpa like asking me about Sam, and my grandpa lives in Nebraska. So
Did he
that's a
make you put your eyes into the orb as part of the contract?
no, I have not used the orb yet, but I do think it is pretty cool. Um, Uh, but yeah, we've raised significantly more money since. We just haven't been very public about it. We do have some stuff coming out soon that we'll talk about it. But we've raised significantly more capital than that. That was like about a $30 million round. So we've raised a lot more since then.
Very cool. Um, on that similar note, I think it's been I don't want to say a tough time, but a rocky time for like the overall industry, just as part of the general sort of tech
Yeah.
right sizing. We've seen some of your competitors kind of quietly go under. Other ones seem to have struggled, and still other ones have done well. So I'm curious, like, how do you see the state of the competition? I'm not saying you got to name names, but like, where do you see this all going in terms of competitors and playing nicely? And is it gonna consolidate?
Yeah, I think you know funding can distort some of the fundamentals, of course, right? Like, I think we had Neuro, for example, that had raised right. Everyone talked about Neuro because they'd raised $2 billion, something like that, right? So they had a ton of cash, but they were building like a full size road vehicle. They were doing a lot of kind of early tests. They had like an incredible autonomy team. They had an incredible team, right? Still
Yeah,
do. Um, but like that thing obviously is just really far from commercialization, and they don't have they while they had a huge balance sheet, they don't have a Waymo balance sheet. So I think that's like a difficult problem to escape. So I think we're seeing them change their approach a little bit and be more of like the software layer, which I think makes a ton of sense for them. Um, uh, and then you have other companies that are more kind of similar form factor to us. I mean, I think the biggest thing is like if you just look at our fundamentals, right? Our vehicles are a few $1,000s. I don't know how you make this business work if it's not a few $1,000s.
Yeah.
And it'll come down with scale. They'll make modifications. I totally get all that. But still, we have thousands of vehicles today. We will have tens of thousands of vehicles later this year. That is a lot of capex if the thing costs 50 grand or 100 grand, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot of capex, and that's capex that will never pay itself back. So it's not just like, oh, we'll figure it out later. Like this is what we saw a lot in the scooter industry, right? It's like you can't figure it out later. Like that's an asset that
Later
now
is
what are
too
you
late. Yeah.
you're going to write it down in a year. You're going to take a huge loss. And so that's a really tough problem. And people just don't do this math a lot. Take a $50,000 vehicle and divide it by 3 or 4 years or whatever you want to underwrite the lifespan to, and divide it by how many trips per day you think you can do per vehicle. That's not a small number. And we're trying to transport food, right, for like,
Yeah.
in the single digit dollars a delivery, right? So there is not a lot of margin there. And that's just depreciation on the CapEx. So that's before you're going to teleoperators, cell data, insurance, customer support,
Everything. Yeah. Yeah.
maintenance, repair, vans, a warehouse, general manager, right? I mean, so I just practically speaking, like getting our fundamentals in order was very difficult. And if your vehicle is not this level of cost, it just won't work no matter what you do. It doesn't. I don't care if you have no teleoperators. It doesn't. It still doesn't work.
Have
Even if you
have
get it to be fully autonomous.
have any of your brethren companies, approached you about a merger or a buyout or anything like that?
No, I do think I do think you know we're already seeing that in the AV space a little bit, right? I mean, I don't
Yeah.
know that it's necessarily consolidation, but like the OEMs are definitely saying like I don't think we all need our own research lab, which makes sense, especially as Waymo's kind of pulled ahead. Um, so yeah, like I think like we've really focused on fundamentals. I think that's really going to benefit us in the long run. We'll be way more capital efficient with all of the money that we raise. We can put that towards growth and new products and building new things for our customers rather than subsidizing the capex. So I think that's going to be really good. But I'll also say one thing I think that is not very intuitive is kind of the smaller form factor versus the full size AV. So if you look at like, okay, well, if Waymo and or any or Tesla, if their cars are fully autonomous
Sure.
in downtown Chicago, does it make sense to have like the smaller form factor robot like Coco because it's going to be slower than those cars, right? And they can do rides and food, right? I think that's kind of an argument I hear all the time. Um, in the suburbs, yes, I think that could be a real food delivery opportunity or package delivery, grocery delivery with those kind of full size AVs. In a city, I mean, this was so important to us. Like we started the company with a merchant and worked backwards, right? I don't know how a merchant would ever use a full size AV in like downtown Chicago or New York or even a lot of parts of LA, right? That AV has to go park somewhere.
Yeah.
The restaurant has to go find that car. I mean, imagine food delivery today if the DoorDash driver is just parked wherever they found parking spaces and the restaurant had to go out and grab it, right?
Yeah.
Like, again, a strip mall along the freeway in Houston, not a big deal. Downtown Chicago or downtown Los Angeles or any of these urban markets, that's a huge deal. The restaurant will just not use it. I mean,
Yeah.
right. We put a lot of effort into like how is the best way for them to walk like 10 feet. Imagine having them have to like leave the restaurant and leave the block, right? Because it's not
Yeah.
like you can just have a line of AVs blocking the road, right? So I think that merchant handoff experience is super important. And so the smaller form factor vehicle, like we call them robo couriers because they're kind of like the autonomous vehicle equivalent of a bike courier. So any market where a bike courier makes sense, I think this is not just a kind of cheaper and faster go to market vehicle. This is a superior form factor. And it's built on four scooter motors essentially, right? So it can go the speed of a bike courier. It can, in some jurisdictions, it can use bike lanes, it can use shoulder of roads in addition to the sidewalk. But I think having that form factor be able to go either in the restaurant or right up to the window or like right next to the door or the back alley, I think that's super important. And we can fit
Sure.
20 of these in a single parking space. So we can actually manage like very busy restaurants that are doing, 40 hours at peak, 40 orders an hour at peak. Like we can actually meet that with a single parking space. So imagine trying to do that with full size AVs. It's super difficult.
Yeah.
So that form factor, I think, is actually like the ultimate form factor in urban markets for our
Sure,
customers.
that's the entire why, right? It's more efficient, it works better. So I'm kind of thinking final thoughts, Zach. Where do you see this all go in the next couple of years? What's put on your prognostication cap?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super exciting time to be in this space. I mean, AI and robotics has had a crazy moment recently, and it is taking a lot of the attention of big companies, and a lot of their kind of free cash flow dollars are going to AI, and I think robotics is going to be a huge component of that. Obviously, you hear OpenAI and you hear Elon talk a lot about, and Jensen, I think recently started mentioning a lot about how NVIDIA's big push is in robotics. So I think it's going to be a crazy few years in terms of all form factors of robots and self-driving cars. Obviously, in Los Angeles or San Francisco, I mean, you see Waymos all the time, and it's become like
Yeah.
a real part of life. I think that's super cool. I love using the product. I think it's an incredible product. Um, so I think we're going to see that accelerate a lot. On Coco's end, we're going to be launching a lot of new cities. So we're going through a global expansion right now. It's going to be US. It's not just going to be the US. It'll be US, Europe, Asia. So we'll be doing a pretty rapid rollout of the service, uh, and really try to focus on those initial markets where it's dense, urban, super high cost of living, and most likely the ones that have difficult weather patterns. So I think this will be available to a lot more people, very quickly. And I think it will make delivery so much more pleasant and accessible. It is so expensive to get food delivered. Um, that just the fundamentals of food delivery are incredibly expensive. So I think being able to reduce that is going to give people that convenience for a lot more of their you know uh, purchase their purchases throughout the week.
Well, watch out, world. You heard it here first. Zach, thank you so much. I think this was a fascinating conversation, and eager to check in as things progress nicely.
Yeah, good to see you, Jonah. Thanks for having me.